So I have a book from the Tales of the Weird series from British Library Publishing. This one is the latest one, I think, or one of their most recent. This is Doomed Romances, and it's edited by Joanne Ella Parsons. So this is a book of short stories titled Doomed Romances, Strange Tales of Uncanny Love. And it's from the British Library Tales of the Weird series, as I mentioned. It features 12 stories of doomed or dark romances from some best-loved authors like Mary Shelley and Wilkie Collins, Angela Carter, Nalo Hopkinson. It's a nice snapshot of this type of spooky, sort of maybe gothic or darker love story through time. So the earliest story is from 1833 and it kind of runs through to 2000. And then the last two stories are much more recent. They're from just from a couple of years ago. So I recently have talked about a few different series from the British Library. Most recently, their hardback series Gilded Nightmares, which I love. And before that, I have also talked about some of their classic crime paperback series. They have quite a few different ones in that range too. So at that point, when I was talking about those, I mentioned this series, the paperback series Tales of the Weird. And yeah, I mean, I hadn't read any of that series at that point, so I'm very excited to be sharing this book with you, basically. So Tales of the Weird is a series of books that features themed books of short stories gathered together to sort of showcase the more rare or overlooked stories from some best-loved or even forgotten favorite authors. According to Goodreads, there are 55 titles in the series, with titles like Platform Edge, Uncanny Tales of the Railways, and Evil Roots, Killer Tales of the Botanical Gothic. Those both sound really good to me. From a quick look, I can also tell that some are collected tales from one particular author as well. Like there's one that's just Algernon Blackwood, one that's William Hope Hodgson, and they're all sort of, you know, spooky or horror or sort of dark tales. Tales of the weird, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I've had my eye on this series for quite a while because I love these kinds of stories, and especially older kind of spooky stories I really enjoy. And I do also really love the cover designs of these. These are generally one vibrant color contrasting with black, and then a dark, evocative, spooky cover illustration. It's very dramatic and I like it. This is my first one in the series that I've gotten my hands on, so I was very excited to read this one and share it with you guys. Like the Gilded Nightmares series, this book started with a nice introduction from the editor talking about the unifying theme of the stories that were chosen and a little bit about sort of why that's important, why that theme is important. Each individual story also gets its own short introduction with a little bit about the author and a little maybe about the context, like maybe why that particular story was chosen or, anything that might be sort of relevant. Here, the stories are all themed around romance with a twist. So the introduction tells us that, romance as a genre often works on stereotypes and tropes, things like enemies to lovers, damsels in distress, or even tough women who need taming in some way, that kind of idea. Things like obsession, helplessness or powerlessness, and death are made romantic, meaning that a thread of sort of abusive or toxic love or relationships can often be hidden in these stories in a way, or historically have been. Also, there's the idea that a dead woman is forever young and beautiful, captured in time, and unable to bother her biographers with her flaws or by having wants and needs of her own. So she sort of becomes sort of perfect in the eyes of the person telling the story, according to our editor anyway. And so in the teeth of this notion, the editor throws these stories that subvert the trope with women who bite back, are predatory themselves, or in other ways defy the patriarchal view of them. So I think that's a really interesting, kind of wonderful organizing principle for these stories. I think that's really fun. I think it's always interesting to kind of turn things on their head and look at examples of the way some stories get sort of subverted or are given like twists by kind of playing with tropes of a genre. So I liked that, looking at this from a different angle. But I kind of have to say, like, in fairness, while some romance stories can definitely be toxic or downright silly, I by no means think that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I feel like a lot of criticism of the romance genre comes from it being considered a women's genre and therefore sort of suspect or non-intellectual or sort of frivolous in some way. And really, what is life without a little romance? People suffer from too much reality, I think. So I don't think there's anything that wrong with, romance novels. There's a lot of them I don't like. Um, but I just thought I would say that because I feel like the premise in the introduction of this book was quite like, I don't like romance, like kind of subversive, you know what I mean? And I was like, okay, but like a little romance is nice. But anyway, just to get back to the point, the editor, also makes the point that often in the past, romance as a genre has not had a lot of diversity, both in authors and in characters included. And so she has made sure to include some stories from a range of authors here. So at first glance, seeing Mary Shelley's name up top and Carmilla by Sheridan Lee Fanu in this list of stories, this feels like the editor's intention should be well demonstrated. But as I was reading these, while I think a lot of them fit the title of being sort of a dark take on a romantic theme or story, there were more like happy endings and fairy tale tropes than you would think. A few times I found myself thinking part of the way through a story, like, this is doomed romances, like, this can't end well. Something really bad is going to happen. But then it actually did end well. So there were more happy endings here than you would think. I think the stories are definitely all maybe on the darker side of romantic, but frequently not doomed. Some are definitely doomed, but not all of them. They definitely work as a collection though, and I liked the ones that were chosen almost totally. But yeah, I was kind of surprised that the whole thing didn't feel more, subversive is the word that comes to mind again. Or like they really broke the tropes that the editor at the start was sort of trying to tell us that we were going to do in this book, It's just an interesting point. As far as doomed romantic tales go, Carmilla is perhaps a really obvious choice to include here. It's actually a novella and not a short story, and it takes up about a quarter of the whole volume. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think it makes the book very uneven because that one is really long. It's a novella and it's included in its entirety. But on the other hand, it's such a good fit for the theme. Carmilla, if you don't know it already, is an early vampire story, one that may have influenced in part Bram Stoker's famous tale. By modern standards, it's fairly tame, really, but its story has sapphic overtones, people. I just find it funny because I feel like a lot is made of like Carmilla has lesbian overtones, but it's really sort of very much implied and very tame by modern standards. The beautiful and strange Carmilla becomes the guest of a young, naive girl in her remote castle home, and she obsesses over her, all before the truth comes out that she's actually a vampire who preys on young women. It's a good story, plenty of drama, and since it's about a predatory love, it fits. But I guess like what occurred to me was really that since it also was written by a man and the nice, straight main character girl is restored to ordinary, societally accepted at the time relationships by the end of the story, it actually, I think, feels a little bit more like a male fantasy than a subversive romance, if we're going to get sort of nitpicky about it. But as a romance, from Carmilla's perspective, definitely doomed. But if you've read Carmilla and you want to kind of say something about that, let me know in the comments, because you might have a different take on it than me. I think my take on Carmilla is maybe slightly different than other people's. Yeah, I won't go through the whole list and say why I think most of the stories didn't prove the editor's premise. I will say that this book of stories is very enjoyable. I really liked it. The one by Mary Shelley and Mary Elizabeth Braddon, I definitely really liked. They're both Gothic romance stories, I'd say, and really nice reading. It's December here. It's heading into Christmas time. That kind of sort of English, the Gothic vibes and the romance. It was just chef's kiss. The one included from Wilkie Collins was quite touching and showed some Victorian doomed romance tropes that kind of were definitely very popular in that time. A handsome captain of a ship remains true to his deceased and gone true love. It's very Victorian, and I love that. Alice Perrin was a new name to me, and I liked her story about a satisfying end to an abusive relationship. That was quite interesting. And yeah, the early part of the book feels cohesive. And then when we get to Angela Carter's story, that was published in 1975, you can feel the shift into more modern era. Like, the writing style is it shifts a little bit. And yeah, the writing style and tone of this story is a little bit different, but it fits really well. It's a dark fairy tale, which was one of the things Angela Carter was known for. And it's very dramatic, intentionally so. And yeah, quite satisfying. I really like that one. I've read a few of Angela Carter's books, but not enough. I really want to read a little bit more of her stuff. Again, if you want to recommend any Angela Carter that you like, please let me know. Then we're sort of in the tail end of the book. So the last few stories, I guess I felt like they didn't really fit. They're all quite new relatively, with 2 from 2000 and 2 from about 2020. So we go from 1975, then there's a massive jump to 2000. And so it just felt like these last ones, there wasn't like a flow, like maybe something from the 80s or 90s would have kind of made that flow instead of that jump of like, what would that be, 25 years? And then another jump of 20 years to 2020. Tracy Fahey's story, I hope that's how you pronounce that, Fahy. Her story I really liked. It's got a museum setting and takes inspiration from the anatomical Venus, which was, I think they're from the Victorian era. They're kind of fascinating. Should I tell you what an anatomical Venus is? I guess I might as well. I think they were made out of sort of wax, and it was a woman lying in repose. Often the word Venus comes in because she's usually nude or mostly nude and kind of looks like she's having a good time. But then she's an anatomical model, so you can take out all of her insides. And it was sort of meant to be, I guess, like a medical model to teach anatomy on. But there was definitely this kind of salacious aspect to them, like they were a little bit sexualized. So to me, there's a little bit of horror there, there's a little bit of sort of gothicness there, and then the museum setting, that just kind of fits with where we've been in the book before. So that was a good choice. And it was, again, hi, Grimmy. Grimmy would like to give his opinion. Oh, he's gone quiet again. Yeah, so I think that one fit the atmosphere and the sort of idea of the book as a whole somewhat, but it was written in 2021, so it did feel much more modern. So we had Nalo Hopkinson and Kalamu Ya Salam. I hope I pronounced that right. Sorry if I didn't. These were both fine as stories. I definitely liked that they presented some fresh ideas and themes. And the last story was from V. Castro. I think that was one of the weaker stories to include, that last one. But these 3 are all POC writers. And they mostly fit the theme of being about, relationships or even dark fairy tales. I can see why they're included. But the thing that kind of for me, I was like, there's that time gap. Like, why did we not sort of stick with that? Like it just felt like a jump in time. And you notice that with writing when you're reading these books, especially because they kind of go from like early writing through, right? So there was that. But also, so these three authors are all from the Americas. They're not from the British Isles or even from, off the top of my head, I mean, I could be wrong. I would say, I guess one of them was from Canada. So that was Canada was a British colony. So I guess, but I guess what I was sort of thinking, I feel like I was under the impression that they were going to feature British authors or British literature. But perhaps the series doesn't actually do that, and that's just the impression I have. But hear me out, right? How great would a story by, say, Zadie Smith, Mira Sayal, or Andrea Levy have been at the end of this, just off the top of my head? I think those would have been great inclusions because those are British authors who are people of color. Of course, the story would need to fit the theme, and maybe they didn't have anything that they could find like that, or maybe, they may not have been available for publication by British Library Publishing, like with, what would you call it, like royalties or not royalties? You know what I'm trying to say, I'm sure. So I don't mean to cast any shade on the stories that were included here. I think it's really good to include diverse authors, especially with genres like this, because it's interesting and it makes you think and it introduces you to a wider range of ideas and mythologies and, different things. And I love that. So I don't mean to cast any shade, but I'm aware that there's been a lot of talk about how POC authors in the UK find it really hard to get published. And then in this book, when they could be, would be like the perfect time, the editor has gone for authors from overseas. So it just felt like a missed trick to me, I guess. That said, it did make me curious about reading more from those authors. So not a criticism of the authors. It's just kind of one of those things where you go, this was a good opportunity that you could have used. Yeah, I mean, maybe the British Library might like to publish one of these anthologies just about stories from the Caribbean. That would be cool, like sort of spooky stories from the Caribbean. There are 55 titles in this series. Maybe they have, and I don't know. Another one, V. Castro story, had a sort of South American magic realism adjacent kind of thing happening. And that is such a favorite genre of mine. So if there were short stories within that genre, I would definitely pick up that volume. So, my issue is not really like that I don't want to read this stuff. It's more just that I know that these people, that sounds really rude. I know that people are looking for representation and diversity. And then when the opportunity pops up, I was kind of like, oh, well, maybe they just couldn't. I don't know. I have never edited an anthology, so I'm sure it's not as easy as I'm making it sound. So on the whole, this was a great little volume of stories with a range of styles and ideas around the darker side of relationships or somewhat doomed romances. I really liked a lot of the stories. I didn't hate any of them. There weren't any that I was sort of, didn't love. I guess maybe that last one was a little weaker, but I didn't hate it or anything. I'll definitely be looking out for more of the books in this series. I really like this series so far. I've read one of them, but I do like the British Library's anthologies and stuff. So I'm kind of excited to see if I can get my hands on some more of these. British Library Publishing is here in Canada. Very easy to get in the UK. But sometimes they can be a little hard to find. Or you can find some of them, but maybe if you're looking for really specific ones, it might be a little hard to find specific ones. But yeah, if you've read any in this series and you want to recommend which ones I should read, please let me know because I will be looking out for them. There's one that was called something like Chill Tidings, which was Christmas themed. So I definitely wouldn't mind reading that one. There was one about sort of oceany things, something about, shipwrecks and stuff like that looked really good. And then the two I mentioned earlier in this review, Evil Roots and the one about the railways, I thought both of those sounded like really good fun too. So if you want to recommend any, if you have any other recommendations, please tell me in the comments, because, I have a to be read shelf. And it's not like I don't need to read more books. I have so many books to read. It's ridiculous. Anyway, this book is for you if you have ever lost your lover. It has vampires, castles, lovers in peril, ghostly women, and bad boys. This is a great collection of stories about the other darker side of romance. And this one was sent to me for review. This one was sent to me by the Canadian distributor for British Library Publishing. So thank you so much for that. I think they saw my previous review and they were very generous in sending me this one to share with you guys. So thank you for watching. Hassle me in the comments if you have any thoughts, and I will talk to you there. And this is probably almost Christmas time, so very Merry Christmas to you all. If you would like me to do a recap of sort of things I read in 2024 that I liked or something like that, let me know, because I could do something like that for the new year if you think it would be interesting. Otherwise, have a very Merry Christmas season if you celebrate, and a Happy New Year. And I will be back with more books for you to hear about very soon.